Welcome to Motorcycle Hang Time with Chris Klotz, attorney at Stevenson and Klotz Injury Lawyers. We invite you to hang with us as we talk about the local motorcycle scene, safety issues, and motorcycle law. And now, here's your fellow motorcycle rider and enthusiast and host.
Welcome to Motorcycle Hang Time. This is Chris Klotz with the Stevenson and Klotz Law Firm here in Pensacola, and we are entering into our next episode of this podcast that we've been doing now. Amy's telling me we're on our 7th episode, so the time has flown when we've done this, and I am honored and we are privileged to have Mike Kohler with us here today. Mike, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
Real good. Thank you, Chris.
So if we can, we'll kind of jump into some motorcycle stuff, but first just tell our audience just a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in Pensacola. You've had a fantastic career and are still doing great things out there in the community. And just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll kind of jump into some motorcycle fun.
Well, in all honesty, I ended up in Pensacola by accident. I enlisted in the Navy back in 1986 and as an enlisted guy, went to San Diego and ended up going to a lab school. My first duty station was at Naval Hospital, Pensacola, and I'd never been to Florida. And then after I was in the service for 33 years, and I'd go away and try to come back and go away and come back, and retired in 2020 as a Navy captain as one of the XOs out on the base called NMOTC, Navy Medicine Operational Training Command. And then now I'm a county commissioner for District 2, the West Side, and that's what I'm doing for the county.
Right on. So you're on your second career right now.
Yes, I would say so.
Yeah, very cool. Where are you from originally?
I grew up in Colorado as a kid. That's where I learned how to ride a Honda 125 with
Awesome.
my cousins. And I didn't know if I'd go to college and decided to join the Navy when I was a senior in high school.
Kind of like my dad. My dad was a coastie, and he went from Leavenworth, Kansas to the water, and you go from landlocked Colorado to the water too. That's pretty cool.
I would have went in the Air Force, but they went to lunch. I'm not joking. I had to go in the Air Force because Colorado has the Air Force Academy.
Yep.
And the guy said, "We'll be back in an hour. Can you come back?" And the Navy shop was right next door. So I said, "Well, I guess I'll go talk to him." And ended up going in the Navy, which ended up being a great decision.
That's so cool. So you have a tremendous amount of experience in your medical background. Tell us, when you were kind of starting out, how did you get into the medical side of what you were doing in the Navy?
Well, that was also by accident. I wanted to be an air traffic controller. And back then we didn't have computers, and I couldn't get into that school. So I went to the Longmont Public Library and just pulled the old card catalog and found out what jobs were going to be good in the 90s, and they said medical. So I went back to the recruiter and said, "Do you have anything medical?" Well, of course, they built it up. I was going to be saving Marines' lives with blood shooting all out as a corpsman. Ended up going and being a lab tech, but I got a lot of experience. And then I went into nursing by default. I would have never went into nursing. No one in our family was a nurse if I would have been a corpsman. But then I got into trauma nursing, and then I got into healthcare executive and did a lot of training and policy, did a tour in DC and in Gitmo. But been all over the spectrum from critical care to ER to ambulatory care to policy. And then I got on the healthcare executive side, running clinics and XO and all that.
That's really, really cool. It's really interesting because we were talking before we started the show just about the Road Guardians program that our firm sponsors, a couple of times a year here, and just how important that training can be. Just out of curiosity, have you ever had to intervene in any type of motorcycle emergency in your life as a rider?
Well, not as a rider, but I'll tell you a story. When I was a kid, my mom and dad and sister and I were going to see my great-grandmother, and there was a motorcycle in front of us. This is kind of a sad story. Tractor pulled out, hit the motorcycle, and I'm not sure the guy made it. So I had that in my mind from about 7th grade. But I also always liked motorcycles. And when I was in the emergency room, I occasionally would see motorcycle accidents. And more often than not, they're from someone not paying attention, and then they hit a motorcycle rider, almost always.
Yeah, I mean, in our experience too, because we do, obviously, we do a lot of motorcycle cases here at our firm. And I'm going to say 8 out of 10 times, it's just an automobile driver who doesn't have top of mind awareness for motorcycle riders and makes that, dreaded left-hand turn at an intersection or turning into a parking lot. And, most of the times we see, significant trauma in a motorcycle accident. It's usually not the motorcycle rider. There are youngsters that get out there and do wheelies on the highway and, try to race and stuff. But, most of the time it's just an inattentive car driver.
I agree. So, but most of the stuff I saw were folks that, like you said, left-hand turn or someone not paying attention. Maybe the blind spot hit the motorcycle rider. And then the next thing you know, they've got a fractured, leg or seriously injured, depending on how, the extent of the accident.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit about when you started to ride. Tell me a little bit about that. So you started riding when you were a youngster out in Colorado. Tell me about your first bike and tell me about how you got into it.
Yeah. My grandparents had a farm, and a couple of my aunts lived out there, and so I had cousins that had little Hondas, right? So I'd go out there and stay with them once in a while when I was in middle school, and I'd get to ride the Honda 125, and I loved it. So it was easy. I'm out on farm, there was no real risk, so it was fun. But I always liked Harleys, and that sound of that V-twin engine. And I'd see them, and then when I got to Guam, I saw this military Harley-Davidson sales, and I started talking to them. And you may not remember this, but you'd go in, when you bought one, they'd give you one of those 45s. You could play the sound of the engine. Harley, I don't know if you knew that.
I haven't. Like a 45 record?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. Now we're dating ourselves.
The sound of the engine.
That is really cool.
So I got that, and then I bought one over in Guam right before I left, and I picked it up in Colorado at a Harley-Davidson shop called Freedom Harley.
Now, when you were in Guam, were there motorcycles out there, or?
Oh, yeah. There were motorcycles, and actually, they had a lot of coral roads there, so it was pretty slick.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, but you'd see motorcycles quite a bit. Actually, my first motorcycle license plate was from Guam because I bought it there.
So did you get it there and then it got shipped back to Colorado, or it was the delivery in Colorado when you got home?
It was delivered in Colorado, but I registered it by default, not knowing, thinking that I had to register it there before I got there. So they sent the plate to my house, in Guam, and I hadn't even picked up the motorcycle. So I got the plate, and then they sent it to Colorado, and I didn't have my motorcycle license, but my dad had ridden a motorcycle, so he rode it home, and then I went and took the test a couple days later.
Oh, that's super cool. What year was that again? 87, did you say?
I got in 1996. I came back to the States in 97.
Awesome. So when you were able to get your license, did you have to take a motorcycle safety course in Colorado at the time, or had that happened
No,
yet?
But you had to do a skills test, and I failed it the first time.
Oh, man.
It was hard. Well, I'd ridden a smaller bike, and, you have to turn and you have to stop. And they made you do that test and behind the DMV. And so I passed the written test easily. That was easy, right? But the one where they watch you ride the motorcycle inside the cones and all that, I failed that the first time. They let me come back the next day, and then I passed it. I practiced the whole afternoon. But yeah, the first time I took it, I didn't pass it. But.
Yeah, well, we haven't talked about your present bike, but you made quite a jump from going from the 125 to your Harley. Tell us, what kind of bike are you riding now? And you're riding the same one you bought when you got home,
I did, and I get a hard time from my friends all the time because it's a 1200 custom, and the guys that have the fat boys and all that, they want to give you a hard time. But I like it. It's good for me. I like cruising around town. It's a way for me to, clear my head and just, go to the beach or go out to Perdido Key. I don't go on, cross-country rides. I'm more of a local area rider. But, yeah, I've had it since 97, and I've kept it in good shape. I've had just a few things I've had to have, replaced or repaired on it. But I fire it up about once a month and run around.
That's awesome. Yeah, my bike's set up really for local riding, too. I don't have a cruiser. And it's been chopped, and it's, the seat's it's got a kind of one of them fancy aftermarket seats on it that looks better than it feels.
Yeah, I like the look of those type of bikes. I know they're not comfortable, but they just have that kind of tough, mean, exciting look. And I don't know, that's what I like,
That's pretty cool. So have you done any modifications to it, or have you done any mods?
Well, when I first bought it, of course, I, put the Screaming Eagle on it and the pipes on it and put more chrome on it. Just the minor modifications that you would do, but nothing too crazy.
Right on. So tell me a little bit about how it is that you decided to make the switch over from dirt bikes and that kind of style to Harleys.
That was only by default. Okay, so the dirt bikes, my dad had a Kawasaki, I think it was a 1000 when I was real little, and he'd take me around on that, a little bit, and then he got rid of that bike. And so, and then like I said, I rode the Honda when I was out with my grandparents, but I just always had that Harley Davidson, that American motorcycle. I just wanted one of those. It was just what I wanted.
So did your family ever give you a hard time about riding? Did you come from a riding family?
Well, my dad still has his motorcycle license now. He doesn't ride anymore, but he's 79 years old. So my dad was always he had a few bikes, but then he hasn't ridden in years, but he always kept his motorcycle license up. He'd ride my bike if he wanted to when he came down, but he's kind of out of that now. He's getting up there a little bit, but yeah. So my dad would ride a little bit to answer the question. So I saw that growing up and enjoyed that, and thought I wanted to get my own motorcycle one day.
Yeah. It's really interesting how everybody kind of finds their path to motorcycles. And I've told this story before, so I won't go into it, too fully, but I really kind of had to sneak around riding motorcycles as a youngster because I did not come at all from a riding family. Oh. And everybody thought I was nuts. I would have gotten in a ton of trouble, but I would sneak around as a teenager, and I would ride my friends in the neighborhood that had bikes and ride back on the trails. And that's kind of where I first picked my love up. And it's really interesting to hear, different people's perspective on youngsters riding. You guys, when you were growing up, were you kind of limited to, riding on the farm, or did they tell you to keep off the streets, or did they give you any kind of training, or just kind of learn on the job?
I learned through my cousins.
Yeah.
Go slow until you fall and try not to break anything on the, but that's kind of how you do. Same thing with the bicycle, but the world's changed quite a bit. But, I had enough exposure that I knew how to ride a motorcycle when I got my own. But people used to always say, and I know you've heard this, oh, you're going to kill yourself if you ride a motorcycle, or someone's going to kill you. Being a nurse, I'd seen people that had been in so many different things that were trauma related that never affected my desire to want to ride a motorcycle, because I didn't want to live in fear of, I just didn't want to.
Sure.
I understand the risk involved with riding a motorcycle, and you try to do the best to make sure you're seen and loud and, and wear all the right gear and do what you need to do. But I never was like that. But a lot of people used to always say that to me, and I'm sure as why are you riding a motorcycle? Maybe that's what you were sharing with me, with your family, like, oh, you don't want to do this, you put yourself at risk. But I never looked at it like that. I think there's a lot of things that you could be at risk for.
Agreed. There's so many different ways that you can get called on to your greater reward. I think that's a very consistent thought of not living in fear and just living your life and doing those things that you want to do. And that's really a lot about what the motorcycle community was about. There are almost 9 million motorcycles registered in the United States, and there are almost 5,000 motorcycle fatalities a year. That's almost 14 a day. Motorists don't do a good job looking out for motorcycles, and neither do insurance companies. Hi, I'm Chris Klotz, and as a writer and an attorney, I know that insurance companies treat motorcycle cases differently. If you've been injured in a motorcycle accident, bring your case to me to review. Let me take my riding experience and my knowledge of how to deal with insurance companies to get you the compensation that you deserve. The call and the advice during the call are free. Stevenson and Klotz Injury Lawyers, bring it. It's just fascinating to know that if it's not fair to lump you into this category, let me know. But I'd say you and I are probably both pretty straight-laced. We're not really like what you would consider to be like hardcore, your typical biker. I mean, we're just kind of regular folks going through life who have somehow found a fondness for riding, and everybody has a different reason why they really like to ride. What are the, kind of the top things that really draw you to that freedom?
Well, that's what I was going to say. The sense of freedom when you turn over that bike and you hear that sound and you pull that throttle, and all of a sudden you hear the wind's flying through your hair and the wind's pushing back your chest, and all of a sudden you just feel this escape of like, man, nothing to worry about. Just enjoy the next amount of time I'm doing this. And that I just like that. It's the same reason why I love running. People say, oh, why do you run? I love the feeling when you finish, when you're done with the run.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of reasons why people do things, but I just enjoy that, getting out and, going someplace and experiencing that feeling. And I think for most people, it's a way just to de-stress in some aspect, I guess I'd say.
It's very much of a de-stressor for me too. And I've found, kind of use the analogy, like there's a couple of different sports that I do that have that same feeling. And to me, the most analogous sports feeling to riding for me is snowboarding. Like
I'm a skier.
on a motorcycle.
So, yeah. So I don't snowboard, but I've been skiing. I ski every year. Yeah. So I got to get a few days in. Yeah. But I should try snowboarding. I don't think I have the skill set for it. I'm getting a little older. I mean, I have the ability like I used to have.
Well, you know what I found? I switched over to snowboarding, I don't know, probably a decade or so ago. And for me, my knees give me a hard time because I was a cross-country runner in high school and I pole vaulted in high school, and my knees don't cooperate as much as they used to. And I found actually the snowboarding is easier on my knees than the skiing is. But I took some really, really hard falls and had to get over my stubbornness and take a couple of lessons. And that helped me out on the transition from the skis. But I did want to talk about, because I know we're switching gears from motorcycles for a second, but just kind of your lifestyle is just absolutely fascinating to me. I read in your bio, I think that you have run a marathon in every state.
My wife and I have together.
Yeah, your wife and you have. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's absolutely fascinating and admirable to me. That's cool.
I will. I'm going to South Africa next week to do one on a safari. But and I'll get to that in a minute. But the reason I got into this was I was stationed out in Oakland, and I was working in orthopedic floor. A lot of motorcycle accidents. I was just guy that came to mind, a guy that hit a cow. But I was in a class at Cal State Hayward at the time, and they were writing goals, which one to do. And I said, I want to go to every state. And I ran cross country too. And so I was like, I want to run a marathon in every state. And I did it. It took me 18 years. And now we're doing the continents, and I only got 3 left. And after a week and a half from now, I'll only have 2. But I'm not running like I used to. I used to be a pretty good runner around here. But I got COVID a couple of years ago, and it really affected my breathing. But I'm going to finish them even if I run, walk, and chalk that up. And then after that, I'll probably be done with the marathons. But, I've always been a goal setter. And goals are important for people no matter what they are. It's probably why I've had the success I did in the military. I think if you don't have goals, your purpose is not the same. And so I've always set goals, in a lot of financial goals, spiritual goals, physical goals. And so for me, and fortunately I have a good spouse that we are together on a lot of these, so that makes it fun.
Yeah, so that was one of my next questions I was going to ask. Does your wife ever ride with you?
When I first met her, I was at the beach and took her on a ride, and she was scared to death. And we used to ride a little bit. We have stories about went to a Scambia football game, it was freezing, she rode home. She doesn't like, now that we're a little older, she's a lot more hesitant. So she doesn't ride with me like she used to. But yes, she used to ride. The first date we had, we went on our motorcycle. But yeah, she's got a little bit more nervous as she's gotten older. So I would say not as much as she used to.
Was that here in Pensacola when y'all had your first ride? Or
McGuire's run. She was a great runner too, and we've been together for over 20 years. We were both married before, but we've been married since 2004.
How cool.
So, but yeah, and we met at the McGuire's run. She's from here. She went to Washington and stuff, but running's been part of our life. And motorcycle, she's a lot more resistant. I'm an adventurer. I scuba dive, I ski. I did get her into skiing, but not the same as I did, so we'll see. But she won't ride anymore, to answer your question in short. But
I get it. When you were out in Colorado, how did you fare? Where was your kind of limits with the cold weather riding? I know there's probably a season out there, and I hate to sound so unknowledgeable about it, but I bet that most people are not riding in the snow once it starts snowing. People shut it down. And
I never really rode there because after a kid, we always rode in the summer, right, when I was younger. But I never really rode my motorcycle ever in Colorado because I was always stationed somewhere else. So it was always warmer climates. But there's a lot of motorcycle riders in Colorado. Oh, my gosh. Yeah. In the summer, you see a bazillion of them all over the place. But I'd say it's whenever it's not snowing, you can see bikers out. But no one rides in the snow at all.
Yeah, no, I mean,
yeah.
You can tell I'm a Southern boy. I've only been to, for a couple days at a time out to the really snowy weather. I think the coldest place I ever lived was maybe also still the hottest place I lived. My dad was stationed up in D.C. for a while, and, it gets cold up there. But also, man, the summers up there can be treacherous.
I was stationed up there. I did a tour up there. Yeah, 5 to 7 I was up there.
Did you have any tours that were in any foreign countries that had like a high percentage of motorcycle riders? Like my dad was stationed in the Philippines, and we were in Manila for about 3 years. And I remember, I was around a teenager around then, and I remember just like there were as many motorcycles as cars. Have you ever have a tour in a place like that?
Well, I hadn't had a tour, but I've been all over Europe with the Navy. I used to teach for Bureau of Medicine, so I was over Japan and both Spain and Italy. I've been all over there. You see a lot of motorcycles in Italy, but they're like scooters. They're not like what we consider, but they're everywhere. So you see a lot of two-wheel vehicles all over both Spain and Italy, but not like Harleys,
Yeah. Well, something interesting that I learned a couple years ago about Europe is that the price of your driver's license is related to the size of the engine that you're typically driving. So my understanding is not every country, but in a lot of the European countries, if you have a scooter that's just got like, a couple 100cc engine, the price of your driver's license is much less expensive. But if you get something like a Harley over there with the 1200 in it, your license your cost actually goes up.
I'll tell you this, if you're ever worried about riding a motorcycle in the United States, just go to Italy on a scooter. Your fears will go away. It's a whole other world.
Yep. Yeah. So you had a couple other things that I kind of want to touch on. I know that you have a love for dogs, and I've always had an affinity for the kind of dog you have. Tell us how you got into pugs.
My wife. So when we met, she had a fawn. Do you have a pug?
So when I was a kid, my mom and dad always had pugs, and we always tried to target having a litter of pug puppies around Christmas. And so we always had like Christmas pugs growing up, and they're the cutest dogs ever, and they're so sweet. And I don't have one now. That's a big part of my childhood. That's
so funny. So we had a basset hound, and Shannon had a fawn before we got married. They both died around 14, and she was aching. And so they were girls, and we never had a boy pug. And I got that one in Jackson, and I said, well, so now we have Jackson, and it's a male pug, and man, the most loving dog. He's got a few problems like every dog, but what a great dog. I didn't know that. My wife's going to like that about you, because she is, if I was to go away, she'd have a pug farm over in Star Lake.
Oh man, that was always the big event. And they're so cute when they get to be older, but as puppies, they're just really adorable. And so we always had a litter of, around 3, 4, 5 of them. And we had 2 different pugs when I was growing up, and that was just a big part of my childhood. And I would bet there is still pug hair somewhere in some of my possessions somewhere, because they're about the sheddenest dogs I've ever seen. Yeah, I mean, there's hair everywhere from those little guys. So, yeah.
They're great dogs, though.
Well, we're kind of coming to the end of our time together, and golly, we hardly touched on anything. I mean, it seems like this has gone by really quick. But I just, one last question. You think your 1200 Harley is your bike for life, or you got an eye on anything new and different?
Yeah, I like road bikes, so I'm always looking at, like what you said, the ones that have kind of been worked on, that have the neat paint job. And so I was out at Cottonmouth about a month ago looking at some of their bikes that, John has out there.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with him out on...
Trevin was one of our very first podcasts. So, yeah, I'm out at Cottonmouth. I'm out at Harley. Love both of those places. He's got some nice
bikes in there.
Oh, man, he's got some classics. I mean, he's got some of the like high-end collector's items out there, and they do great work. We did a bike reveal out there for Chris Best, who's Biker Dad, and he had a bike that was done customized for them, and it got delivered a few weeks ago, and we did a show out there, and it was just tremendous fun. So
I'm looking, let's put it that way. I'm always looking for something. I got to convince my wife, but she'll let me do it if I want to, but yeah, I like unique stuff. So when I see what I want, I'll go for it.
Well, very cool. Well, Mike, I've so enjoyed having you on here. May have to get you back in and talk a little more about riding. If you get a new bike, you got to let me know and we'll get you on and talk about your new bike, or if there's any time you want to come back, love to have you back. Audience out there, thank you guys for listening, and thanks to Mike Kohler for being here. And I just can't thank you enough for your time today and sharing with us kind of your motorcycle story. That's what it's all about, is finding out how everyday folks are getting involved in riding and what it means to them. So I really appreciate you coming out today.
Well, thanks, Chris. I appreciate your time as well. And boy, you have an exciting story as well. I'm glad I got to know you a little bit today.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to see you a little bit more around town. This is Chris Klotz with Motorcycle Hang Time. We will catch you on the next episode. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for hanging out with us on Motorcycle Hang Time with Chris Klotz. Go to StevensonKlotz.com to get more information about motorcycle safety issues and motorcycle law. Please leave us a rating and a review whenever you listen to your podcast. We invite you to spend time with us on our next episode.